right, everybody. Let's spin the wheel. See what we get. Find out what's happening in the world of us choosing vintage games to review. Oh, Berserk for the Atari 2600. This is going to be fun. I love Berserk. It's a really good game. Anyway, so yeah, we'll be right back with game review. So, today we're going to take a look at a true classic of video game lore. This is right out of the history's pages of video game awesomeness. It's Berserk. You have to have Berserk if you are a console that was released in that first wave of home video game consoles. You have to, by law, have a port of this game. Otherwise, your thing is of no consequence. Just kidding. I thought Intellivision had a port of this, but apparently they don't. But the Vectrex does. The Atari 2600 does. And there's a thing that I know for a fact that the Intellivision has that this Atari 2600 version does not, which we have to get this out of the way right up front, is the voice synthesis. The voice synthesis is honestly one of the most important aspects of the game when you are talking about the arcade original. It would talk at you as you were playing, and the robots, if you were running away, they would be like, "Stop, human, fight like a robot," and like they would call you chicken and stuff. They would be like, "Got the chicken, got the intruder." The best, the absolute best, like that early generation of voice synthesis where it barely sounded like a voice. We're talking like speak and spell level of voice synthesis. We're talking, oh, here's a deep cut. Dr. Spatzo. Yeah, if you remember Dr. Spatzo, then you are a champion. Insert audio of Dr. Spatzo talking right here. Yeah, that's a thing. Let's see if I remember to insert that or if I just leave dead air in the middle of a review. Anyway, so the voice synthesis was one of the most charming things about the arcade version of this game. But, like, what was capable of doing that voice synthesis? Certainly not the Atari 2600. Not at all. Not able to do it. And you kind of expected that that would be the case. Because, like, yeah, the Atari 2600 couldn't do Pac-Man, if you remember correctly. Like, that port was a disaster. It could port some video games to the Atari, and some of them were pretty good. Some of them were straight up garbage. And of the ones that are straight up garbage, Pac-Man is like chief among them. Also, the Atari 2600 invented the bad movie game with the infamous E.T., the extraterrestrial video game that found its way into a New Mexico landfill. Can you still buy landfill copies? Probably. I don't know. I thought about buying one when they first dug them up, and then I was like, I don't like this game. I already own a copy, and I already don't like it. How badly do I want a piece of video game history that I would be willing to, like, purchase something from the garbage? Anyway, regardless. So, in terms of the port itself, this one plays very, very similar to the original, and that is commendable. Even down to the sort of frantic leg motion of the protagonist as he runs away. The hardest part about this game, and I will be perfectly honest with you, the hardest thing that I found was figuring out the best gameplay mode. Because if you remember how things worked on the Atari, it was with all switches and whatnot, and you would have to like manually select the difficulty by like throwing switches. And we're talking like big, heavy switches, the kind of switches that were on like, Pioneer receivers and whatnot, like big, heavy frig switches. And my Atari 2600 is the heavy sixer version, which means that it's an early one. It was made in 1977. I've been inside there. I've seen the date code. I had to, as very many people do, I had to replace that AC power jack, because when I was like, hey, does anybody have a mono 3.5 millimeter jack that can be used for power? And everybody was stumped by this question. They're like, I know it can do audio. And I was like, whatever. So I followed the terrible advice of a video game store employee who was like, look at the bottom of the power supply. How much power does that supply? And I was like, 9 volts at hardly any amps. And he's like, exactly, that's a 9-volt battery that you are plugging in there. He's like, just solder the thing directly to the board. Do it now. You won't do it. And I did. And so now my Atari 2600 has its power brick soldered directly to the board, and guess what? It works fine. Totally fine. There's a pro tip for those of you who are like, I have this Atari, but the power is dingus, because it is. Because they were running power off of the thing that's not even, it maketh no sense, people. Anyway, regardless, we're not talking about that. We're talking about like those big heavy switches. You had to select the correct gameplay mode, and it wasn't just a straight order of like, this one is harder than this one, like mode 2 is harder than mode 1. It doesn't necessarily work like that, because sometimes you're turning Evil Auto on and sometimes you're turning Evil Auto off. Who is Evil Auto, pray tell? Well, yeah, none but the most evil thing imaginable, a big old happy smiley face. So evil. If you linger too long on the level, Evil Auto will come after you. And also, depending on which mode you've selected, will determine how long he waits before coming out. So when you're flipping through those selections of which version of the game you want to play, because it's all different versions, and I did not pull up the manual on Atari Age like I should have. Always use Atari Mania, actually. Atari Age does the really cool repros, and they have really good forums for Atari stuff. And Atari Mania has all of the, like, official ROM dumps and all of the scans of every manual. Fantastic resources. So if you didn't know about those, Atari Mania and Atari Age are places that if you are an Atari person at all, you need to be there. Like, that's where the stuff is happening for real. Anyway, so I didn't pull up the manual, so I didn't know which version I was dealing with. And so it was a lot of, you'll see in the footage, like sometimes I will just get wasted immediately because Evil Auto shows up immediately and the robots are coming at me too fast and too furious. Man, they make a good movie title. Anyway, regardless, I was overwhelmed and overpowered too quickly in some of those game modes, and it's not dependent on the number, because like 12 was easier than 3, and I don't know what the difference there is in terms of actual gameplay. I just know that in 3.12, I don't know if Evil Auto shows up. 3, he does show up but not too quickly, because I think on 9 he shows up almost immediately. There's one where he just comes after you, and he's a constant menace. And that, yeah, part of the problem of playing this Atari version is, and I don't know that like having access to the text would even tell me what I needed to know, which is like, okay, but how hard is this specific version of the game? Hard to tell. But 3 turned out to be the right amount of challenge. Like, hard enough to where I wasn't just automatically going to win every level, but easy enough that I could win most of the levels if I really made sure I didn't do anything stupid like walk into a wall, which I did more of when I was capturing game footage than I did when I was playing by myself in preparation for making this video, because that's always the way, innit? Governor. Anyway, I don't know why that's the voice that needs to be said in, but apparently it is. So yeah, Berzerk for the 2600 is not a perfect port, but if you look through the ports of arcade games onto the Atari 2600, it is top 10 of the best ones. Like, for real, it's got to be in the top 10, because the gameplay is like 85 to 90% there, which for an Atari 2600 game is a lot. And I mean, obviously there are games that were made specifically for the 2600 that utilize the 2600's capabilities and graphically and control wise to a very good degree. I'm thinking of things like Kaboom, Keystone Capers, really most of those Activision games, we all know it. Like, it's just all the colors of the rainbow. I do envy people who have a complete set. I have a mostly complete set of Activision games on the Atari 2600. Not boxed, though. Ain't no John Hancock, which, the immortal John Hancock has all of the things. He has a channel that you can check out if you're very into Sega. Like, he's a big Sega dude, and he's a big Atari dude. And so if you're into those things, like, he has complete collections for multiple systems, and it's really impressive. Because he collected a lot of it, like, on the cheap. But, like, we're talking boxed copies and stuff. Really impressive. Anyway, regardless. But yeah, those Activision games... things like, even a game like Robot Tank, utilizes the abilities of the 2600 much more impressively than most of the arcade ports. Like, most of the arcade ports, Pac-Man is the turd standard. It's not a gold standard, it's a turd standard. It's a standard of this is how bad it can get when we go adapting arcade games to the 2600. And so in terms of what is possible on this console, this is surprisingly good. Like, really. Obviously, the arcade version's graphics are better. The versions that I grew up playing on 8-bit Atari, way better, graphically and control-wise. But yeah, this is a perfectly serviceable version of Berzerk, and indeed a fun version of Berzerk, because, I don't know, the size of the bullets makes it interesting, because it makes you feel like, yes, I can dodge that, but then also sometimes you don't. And those robots, when they get the chance, they will shoot you over and over and over and over, because, I don't know, whatever is the bit of code is supposed to make them realize that you're already dead. They keep shooting you after you're dead. It doesn't make up for the lack of voice synthesis, but yeah, if you're willing to overlook the lack of voice synthesis, which would have been darn near impossible. I know that someone invented a module for the 2600 for voice synthesis, like way late in the console's life cycle. It wasn't like the Intellivision where it basically had it from the word go. But even the Intellivision, I think that's like the Intellivision 2 has it built in. I think the Intellivision 1, it's an add-in. Anyway, regardless, we're not here to talk Intellivision 1 and 2. We're here to talk Berzerk. And what I'm telling you is that this game is an absolute classic. And it's, yeah, for arena shooters, this is the granddaddy of all arena shooters. I mean, this and Robotron and like Wizard of War, those are your like the godfathers of everything. They established what the genre was, and you can't get from that to whatever spectacular arena shooter you want to play in the here and now without having gone through Berzerk first, because it was a necessary step in the evolution of gameplay, of video gaming in general. This is a Hall of Famer. So yeah, first ballot Hall of Famer in my book. Honestly, I've always loved this game. And so to have a perfectly playable version of it that is not perfect in every detail, but is good enough in most, yeah, that's where this game lives. Let's put a final score on it, and then we'll be done. Okay, so final score for Berzerk on the Atari 2600. We are going 8 out of a possible 10 Tracer butts, because you don't get Tracer and her controversial buttocks without first there being established arena shooters, you know, like Berzerk and the others I mentioned, your Wizard of Wars, your Robotrons, etc. Like, these are the godfathers of the things we enjoy today, and therefore 8 out of a possible 10, because when it comes to Atari 2600 games, you got to really recognize the ones that are highly playable. And even though I do miss the voice synthesis, I'm not going to lie, this one is highly playable, and indeed one of the better games on the Atari 2600. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one, people. I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.